I'm 86 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I was being patient. I didn't realize until very late that what I called patience was actually how I avoided living. That's how I explained it to myself. Patient, careful, sensible. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't lazy. I just kept waiting. Waiting for the right time. Waiting for things to settle. Waiting for conditions to be better than they were. At the time, it felt like I was avoiding mistakes. Only later did I understand I was avoiding decisions. What I didn't understand then is that waiting can look responsible while quietly emptying your life. Most mornings now start the same way. I wake up early, not because I need to, but because my body no longer believes in sleeping in. The house is still, too still. I sit at the small table by the window and drink my coffee slowly, not because I'm savoring it, because there's nowhere else I need to be. That's when the thoughts arrive. Not regrets exactly. Those come later. First comes the inventory. All the moments I told myself, not yet. I used to believe people like me were disciplined. I admired that about myself. I didn't chase impulses. I didn't make emotional decisions. I planned. I thought that was wisdom. What I didn't see was the cost of always planning for a future that never quite arrived. When I was younger, I was convinced life worked like a sequence. First, stability, then freedom. First, responsibility, then meaning. So I delayed anything that felt fragile or uncertain. Trips I wanted to take, conversations I knew would be uncomfortable, changes that scared me more than they should have. I told myself I was being strategic, and people around me agreed. They said I was grounded, level-headed, reliable. That praise mattered to me more than I realized. Looking back, I can see the pattern clearly. I didn't wait because I lacked courage. I waited because I liked being seen as someone who had control. Control felt safe. Waiting felt safe. I learned early that moving too fast had consequences. What I didn't realize is that safety can quietly turn into avoidance. There were moments that should have mattered more than they did. Opportunities that came with a window attached. Relationships that needed a response, not a delay. Decisions that couldn't survive being postponed without consequence. Each time I told myself the same thing. Later, when things are calmer. Later, when I'm more prepared. Later, when it makes more sense. Later became a habit, and habits shape identity. I started to think of myself as someone who wasn't impulsive, someone who didn't rush, someone who waited for certainty. That identity became comfortable. Too comfortable. I didn't notice what it was replacing. I remember turning down an offer once. It wasn't perfect. It required risk. It would have changed the rhythm of my life. I told myself it wasn't the right time. That sentence followed me everywhere. It became my explanation, my justification, my shield. I used it with my work, with my relationships, with myself. What I didn't notice was how often "not now" quietly turned into never. People around me moved on. They took chances. They made mistakes. They adjusted. I watched from a distance and told myself I was being wise by waiting to see how things turned out. I didn't see that I was slowly opting out. Time has a way of making avoidance look like neutrality. Years passed without drama. No disasters, no big failures. From the outside, my life looked stable. Inside, something was thinning. I didn't feel urgency. I felt suspended, as if my real life was always about to start. I remember thinking more than once, once this phase is over, then I'll begin. But phases don't end cleanly. They bleed into each other. Responsibilities shift. New reasons appear. There is always another reason to wait. That's the part no one tells you. Waiting doesn't require commitment. It doesn't demand a decision. It lets you feel thoughtful without having to act. And slowly, without realizing it, you start living a life that is mostly preparation. The first real crack in this belief came later than I care to admit. It wasn't dramatic. No illness, no sudden loss, just a quiet moment of recognition. I was sitting alone one evening, thinking about all the things I had assumed I would still do. And for the first time, the list felt unrealistic. Not impossible, just unlikely. That distinction matters. I realized I had been treating time like a resource that would wait for my approval, as if life was patient with me because I had been patient with it. That's when something uncomfortable surfaced. I wasn't actually waiting for the right time. I was waiting to feel ready. And readiness, I learned too late, is not something time delivers. It's something you choose without guarantees. I had built my life around minimizing regret. Ironically, that's exactly what created it. Every delayed decision felt harmless on its own, but together they formed a pattern of restraint, of holding back, of staying slightly removed from my own life. I don't blame my younger self. I understand him now. He thought caution was maturity. He thought restraint was depth. What he didn't understand is that some things don't survive being postponed. Certain chances need to be met while they're alive. Certain versions of yourself only exist for a limited time. I waited for clarity. Clarity never came. Instead, time passed. And with it, the version of me who could have lived differently. At 86, I don't feel panic. I feel recognition. The kind that arrives when there's no confusion left. I didn't waste years because I chose the wrong things. I wasted them because I kept choosing not to choose. That realization didn't come all at once. It crept in quietly. In moments when I realized I was no longer asked, no longer considered, no longer expected to participate. Life moves on when you hesitate too long, not out of cruelty, out of momentum. I used to think waiting was neutral. It isn't. Waiting shapes outcomes just as much as action does. That's something I wish I had understood earlier. Because by the time you see it clearly, many doors don't slam shut. They're simply no longer there. I noticed it most clearly in the quiet invitations that stopped coming. Not because anyone was angry, because I had trained people to expect delay from me. When you hesitate long enough, the world learns to move without you. There were projects I was no longer asked to join, trips that happened without my input, conversations that used to wait for my response and no longer did. I told myself it was natural, that this is how life narrows with age. But that wasn't the whole truth. Some of that narrowing was earned. I had become predictable in a way that wasn't comforting. Predictable in my caution. Predictable in my reluctance to decide. People stopped asking because they already knew my answer would come too late to matter. That's a hard thing to admit. Waiting had turned into a reputation. I see now how often I mistook restraint for depth. I thought meaningful choices required complete certainty. I believed that acting without clarity was irresponsible. What I didn't understand is that clarity is often a result, not a prerequisite. You don't wait for it. You discover it by moving. There were moments when a simple yes would have been enough. Not a perfect yes, not a fully reasoned one, just a willing one. Instead, I offered hesitation. And hesitation is difficult to build a life around. I used to believe that patience was a virtue in all situations. I see now that patience without intention becomes avoidance. And avoidance doesn't protect you, it just delays the cost. One of the strangest realizations I've had is this: nothing terrible happened because I waited. That's what makes it dangerous. My life didn't collapse. It didn't explode. It simply thinned. Less texture, less surprise, fewer stories that required courage to tell. Waiting doesn't rob you loudly. It takes quietly. It takes the version of you that might have existed. I think about the people I could have been closer to, not because I didn't care, but because I kept assuming there would be another moment to deepen things. Moments don't stack the way we think they do. They expire, and no one announces when the last one is past. There's a particular kind of sadness that comes from realizing you were present for your life, but not fully engaged with it. I wasn't absent. I wasn't disengaged. I was paused. And life does not pause with you. It took me years to understand that waiting is still a choice, one that feels passive but carries consequences all the same. By the time I understood this, urgency had a different shape. Not panic, just honesty. An honesty that says, some things will no longer be offered. That doesn't mean life is over. It means it's smaller, more defined. And clarity, when it comes this late, doesn't ask for action. It asks for acceptance. I don't tell this to criticize caution. Caution has its place, but when caution becomes a default, it slowly replaces living. If you're listening to this and you're younger, I won't tell you to rush. I won't tell you to leap blindly. I will tell you this: be careful what you postpone under the name of wisdom. Be honest about whether you're waiting for the right time or waiting to feel safe. Because safety has a way of convincing you that tomorrow is guaranteed. It isn't. The right time is rarely obvious, but the cost of waiting becomes very clear later on. I didn't lose everything, but I lost enough to notice. Enough to understand that a life spent waiting can feel calm on the surface and hollow underneath. What remains for me now is not regret in the dramatic sense. It's understanding. Not to be right, just to have been there.